I'm glad to see everyone here today, and though I love the fact that there are so many folks from Parks and Rec, that is the natural, right? I mean, that's you think of getting kids outdoors and playing through Parks and Recreation, but it's so much more than that. I think that's really part of the conversation that we're having, is that there's this anchor institution in Parks and Recreation, but all these other players that need to be engaged, whether it's the Science Museum, or Friends of Mississippi, or Urban Roots, or any of these other organizations that you all represent, to figure out how it is that we reconnect our kids to nature. On a day like today, and we got Greg Lace walking in from Wilderness Inquiry. I've been on the board for a long time, and I never know, do I say inquiry or inquiry?
Inquiry.
Yeah, I'm always, these are the things that you learn when you're outdoors. But the fact of the matter is, we know that there is a huge disconnect right now between our kids and the outdoors. And it isn't just, kind of a Huck Finn experience, where it's like, wow, we're going to go out and, float down the Mississippi River, just for the sake of doing that. It is more intentional than that. It is really understanding that when a child is outside, they're growing, they're learning, they're getting the social emotional skills that they need to be successful. And when we take that away from our kids, we take away a huge part of what will ultimately make them successful. And I told a great story, and those of you in this room have probably heard it, but a few years ago when we had our group of kids that we've sent out to Glacier Park, we've had a dozen or so kids that we've sent out every year in partnership with Wilderness Inquiry and the National Park Service and our Parks and Recreation Department and the St. Paul Public School System AVID program. But you watch those kids that can't even imagine what a mountain looks like go out to Glacier and transform themselves as they spend time out in the woods. And sometimes you can literally see it happening in front of your eyes. And I was hiking behind this young man, and I love to tell the story, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but hiking along the Highline Trail behind this young man, and the first part of the Highline Trail, if you've never been out there, is this really sheer, steep cliff that you have to hold on to a guy wire as you're walking along, because the whole trail is about as big as this tabletop here, and or this podium, and as this kid was walking, he was literally shrinking in front of me and getting smaller and smaller, and got to the other side of this ledge and sat down on a rock. I said, well, let me take a picture of you. He said, no, I'm crying. I said, well, what's the matter? He said, well, I'm deathly afraid of heights. He said, but that's not why I'm crying. I'm crying because this is the most wonderful thing I've ever done. And we went up to the pass, hung around for a couple of hours. By the time we came back over the same section of trail, this kid had to be reminded, would you hold on to the wire? He was skipping along that same section that had brought him almost literally to his knees a couple of hours earlier. And that's the power of nature. And it doesn't have to happen in Glacier National Park. It can happen along the banks of the Mississippi River. It can happen at Frogtown Farms. It can happen in Bento Nature Sanctuary. I don't know if it can happen anywhere in Minneapolis, but I assume there's something over there where this can happen as well. But the fact of the matter is, we have to be intentional about this, and we have to connect it to the learning opportunity, the social emotional growth that occurs in it. Because if we don't do that, then we're not making the right connections on all of this stuff. So I do it because, Margaret and I were talking. I was joking that I hate nature on a day like today. But as we remind ourselves, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothing. And on a day like today, if you got the right rain gear, you go out into this thing. It's the most marvelous, wonderful thing. It's absolutely glorious. Our kids need to understand that as well. So I do get the great pleasure of introducing Margaret and Andy. Andy has worked with the National League of Cities that I used to be the president of for 12 years now, long before I even was really deeply engaged in the National League. And Margaret, of course, has a long track record of connecting kids to nature, Texas roots, and spends a little time outdoors with your kids, right? And understands this as well. So I'm gonna finish with one story as well. We used to take our kids out west almost every summer, do some backpacking, and my daughter, we always had the worst shoes and sock combination, and she'd get these horrible blisters on her feet. And at the end of one 4 or 5 day backpacking trip, she I suggested that she might want to jump into the water and clean up a little bit, and she just said, I'm going to go sit in the car. I go, Molly, I'm not trying to torture you yet. Well, you could have fooled me. And she hated every minute of that trip. But years later, when she went back out to Glacier National Park, she was the expert. She was the person that was leading other kids into the wilderness. She was the one that knew how to set up the tent, how to cook the dinner, and now she is as rugged of a wilderness kid as there can be, even though she's living in New York. But the fact of the matter is sometimes we do torture our kids, but the growth that happens is amazing. So thank you all for being a part of that.
Mayor Coleman, your leadership on this is impacting St. Paul incredibly, but also our national initiative with the partnership between the Children in Nature Network and the National League of Cities. We're working in several cities across the country, and Mayor Coleman, I really appreciate your leadership and your inspiration to those cities as well. So good morning. We are here to talk about children in nature. Why are we talking about children in nature? What is the disconnect? You know, we have a culture of childhood these days that is in peril. And it's not just the children, it's also the environments in which they live. When we think about vibrant places and spaces, which is the thrust of the 880 perspective series, all children don't have vibrant places and spaces. And so how are we going to reverse that along with the culture of childhood, the culture of families? We obviously see the media effects on these kids. They're on media up to 54 hours per week. The data shows us that they're outdoors playing in unstructured play less than 7 minutes per day. That is a gap that we have to deal with. And it's in every family, mine included. The kinds of environments that children are in are stressful, both the school situation around testing and around academic performance is so intensive on these kids, and the homework routine is so intensive that play is not prioritized, and it's not prioritized on the school grounds oftentimes. You have some really great school grounds here, but not every place has that. And so we're really looking to reverse the trend around creating environments for kids on playgrounds where communities can come and be part of that. We also have a situation around this need that we have to create future stewards of our public lands and really of the whole planet, if you think about it. We need these kids now more than ever to engage and care about it, and the way that we get them there is by loving it first. If we don't love the land, we're not going to care for the land. And so we need these kids to be engaged in that way. And the equity issue is real. The data is showing us that there are haves and have-nots when it comes to nature and when it comes to nature access. The other piece here is that there is this sweeping movement around children and nature, but there's also a sweeping movement around active outdoor living and active living in general and healthy eating. So how can we put those two together? How can we build a children and nature effort on existing active living, healthy eating efforts? And so you see here there are some distinctions, but there's also some overlap with active outdoor play, less screen time, and quality family times right there in the middle. So when we think about city systems, how can we leverage what's already happening in one area for the other? And the research is emerging on this issue. We have the director of our research center in the room for the Children in Nature Network nationally, Kathy. And it's exciting to see that more and more research is coming out on this issue. What we're seeing is that contact with nature reduces stress, increases physical activity. There's all kinds of health, physical and mental health benefits here. It even, increases the benefits to birth weight, things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. You expect physical activity, but there's a lot of other kinds of benefits. Social cohesion in communities and families, Academic outcomes, the data is coming in, and we're seeing academic outcomes improving. Attention and focus and those kinds of things, but really what Mayor Coleman hit so hard was the social emotional piece is also so important and such a unique attribute to the nature experience. So when you have exercise, you get a lot of benefit from that, physical and mental. But when you have an experience in nature, you also get the social and emotional and spiritual component to those connections with your peers and to your own sense of belonging. And that is invaluable to these children, especially children who are living in poverty and children who are living in stress. It's so important to them to have that experience. And without that experience, they're really not thriving. So if we think about children thriving in vibrant places and spaces, we want to think about children having a nature-rich experience in a nature-rich environment. We have a research center. You can go look at it at the Children in Nature Network. If any of you are looking to make the case, there's a lot there that can be helpful for you. So the other thing here is that we have a lot of Parks and Rec folks in the room. It's very exciting. How can we locate the children in nature work that is to be done in Parks and Rec and outside of Parks and Rec? Where else does this live? It lives in pre-K. Absolutely, it lives in pre-K. It lives in K-12 schools, not just elementary schools for recess policy and all the things that we need there, but it lives in high schools and middle schools and the jobs pipeline for green jobs, right? So the out of school time network that you have here is one of the best in the country. How can we leverage that? All of the various players, this is just a few. City government, we've got Parks and Rec covered. In St. Paul, we've got libraries covered. Whoop, whoop. With Rebecca and Katrina, I'm really excited meeting you. So the how does water management, how does public health, how does transportation play into this? There's a whole system of city government that's relevant to the children and nature work that is to be done. The healthcare system, pediatricians, hospitals, they're all getting on board with this. And then the conservation groups, of course, and food access and security. Again, this is a systems-wide situation with children being disconnected from nature, and there are system-wide solutions. I'm going to whip through really quickly a couple of examples. Pre-K, nature play areas, sweeping the country. There's a whole movement around nature play areas in pre-K environments. The Sunray Library, your very own. Rebecca Ryan has provided so much leadership on this. Sai, your team just showed up in spades for this. Is that you? No, that's not you. That's one of your guys. Yeah, that's Dan. And David, this is your group getting out. So it takes and this is Wells Fargo. This is a daughter of a Wells Fargo employee. So you have everyone represented here in the partnership to get kids outdoors through a non-traditional venue. Schoolyards being converted from concrete to green with a whole community engagement process in Chicago with water management dollars, okay? It's in the water department. It's not in partnership with K-12 schools. That's a really interesting piece. And doctors are getting their patients outdoors. This is Robert Czar. There's other doctors across the country. There's probably about 50 different ParkRx thriving programs right now where these doctors are partnering, the hospital systems are partnering with parks to get kids and families outside. It's a systems-wide problem and it's a systems-wide solution. I'm going to hand it over to Andy.
Good morning, everyone from the National League of Cities Institute for Youth Education and Families. We're an action tank of 26 subject matter experts working within the National League of Cities, working with dozens of cities every year on a wide variety of children and youth topics and helping cities do even better than they already do. We were really excited 18 months ago when we had the opportunity to partner up with the Children in Nature Network, the leading organization promulgating best practices, encouraging and spreading research about what works in connecting children to nature, pioneering new ventures. And we also were very pleased to have as a partner Wilderness Inquiry based right here to bring their very substantial decades of expertise in getting young people outside. We're about this question of how much better could we do? How much better could we do? How much farther could we get? How could we go faster at connecting more kids to nature abundantly and equitably if we enlist municipal leaders? So we're engaging Mayor Coleman in a cloning experiment. That's part of our project, but it's really adopting his talking points so that becomes part of the talking points of other mayors and infuses down through city departments and through many partnerships with county government, state government, federal government, and other organizations. Margaret was talking a minute ago about Park RX, and the system contact there is often with nonprofit hospitals required to write community health needs assessments, and they have the ability through those assessments, for instance, to describe activities that the hospitals can sponsor to connect more kids to nature. So coming to St. Paul is a rare opportunity for us. We're working intensively with 7 cities this year to develop implementation plans to significantly scale up what they're doing to connect kids to nature. But St. Paul has so many assets to begin with, as Margaret was beginning to detail, and as Anne will emphasize in a kind of coda to this initial presentation. We think of Sunray Library for sure. We think of a system of connectors and parks and lots of money behind development of additional such connectors. We think of Frogtown Farms as an example, developed in close partnership with organizations such as Urban Roots and TPL, nature centers, parks, good neighbors in Ramsey County and Minneapolis to partner with state and federal agencies, Wilderness Inquiry again as a resource and as an activator partner. So we're determined to work with each of the 7 cities, initially here, St. Paul, to take a close look at those assets that you have and say, how can you build upon those assets? And it's a framework some of you may have heard of, pioneered by a fellow named John McKnight, asset-based community development. So we're determined to take an asset-based view of what you're already doing and say, what could be better? What could be systematized? So some of you have been engaged already, and through the process of this morning's meeting, we're in essence engaging all of you in what we're calling a community assessment process. And so a small team already has been hard at work collecting baseline data, understanding who's connecting to nature already, what assets are out there again, what policies are in place that promote or impede access to nature, et cetera. Then we're imagining, as the months roll on here through the late spring and into the summer, that perhaps there'll be a drill down on priority neighborhoods. St. Paul has some really interesting plans to use community liaisons to go deep in those neighborhoods to understand how different types of people experience nature and experience access to nature. Think more about assets, gaps, opportunities, and barriers, and then pluck out some strategies and draft a citywide implementation plan by the end of the summer. So that's the process that St. Paul's going through and that 6 other cities are going through. At the National League of Cities, we always form peer learning networks, so we encourage a lot of cross-pollination, pun intended, with each other's projects. And we'll be gathering those cities actually here in St. Paul in late May as a pre-meeting before the International Conference on Children and Nature. If you're not already signed up, please do. See Margaret. Oops, wrong way. Yeah, so to put a little bit more flesh on the bones and to keep underscoring that the breadth of opportunities that Margaret was showing in her previous graphic, our current thinking, and this is all evolving, very organic process, again, pun intended, is that we've got 5 domains of action, and we want to see what could happen. We don't think we'll get anywhere without leadership. We know we won't get anywhere without expanded and strategically directed programming. We don't think city governments can do it all by themselves, so partnerships are key. We think policy makes a difference. You know, the investment that happened in Sunray is an example of a kind of small-scale policy. So one of the questions we're asking is, what if that became a citywide policy to provide nature contact at every library or some such? Or you have great policy promoting a very systematic approach to out-of-school time, and is there a way to layer in nature connections to what happens through the Sprockets network? We're also, we know that without the right physical assets and the right connectors, the right green places and spaces, and the understanding of within parks, parks are one route of access to natural features, but you can find natural features in other settings as well. We have to pay attention to that. So, domains of action. Just to give you an example of what the small team has been engaged in and what we're going to be drawing upon you for more input today is thinking about the range of programs that are currently operating, asking questions like who's doing it, how is it funded, at what scale is it funded, what do we know, if anything, about the not just the outputs, the number of young people participating, but also the outcomes. What is the impact on the young people along some of the dimensions that Mayor Coleman was mentioning, such as social emotional learning or physical health, mental health, et cetera. And which kids in what neighborhoods are getting that access currently. So that's all establishing the baseline, and then based on that, we collectively make some strategic judgments about where do we need to really scale up and target our resources and emphases. We want to look across a wide range of current policies, always with an equity frame, but as Margaret mentioned, you know, it might be stormwater management and green infrastructure related policies as much as youth development and education. So, questions at this point about the community assessment? Terry.
What are the 6 other cities that you're working with?
Pardon me?
What are the 6 other cities that you're working with?
Yeah, let's see if I can come up with those with Margaret's help this morning. Austin, Texas, San Francisco, California, Providence, Rhode Island, Louisville, Kentucky, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Madison, Wisconsin. So we've got a nice cluster up here in the upper Midwest with possibly some similar conditions, maybe some similarities, and like a little subgroup within our peer learning network that we certainly want to encourage some cross-learning among and between.